As an early Christmas present, we've got a yuletide topped and tailed agenda this evening, stuffed with an interview with newly appointed Cabinet Office Minister David Ashford. What does Mr Ashford hope to achieve in his return to ministerial politics, and does his appointment herald the start of a programme of delivery of much trumpeted, headline-grabbing targets which government has been so good at talking about over the past 3 years? He joins me now in the studio. This is a good time of year to be an MHK, isn't it? Because whilst you, despite what many people might think, you don't just stop for Christmas. There's always plenty of things to occupy you. You do get the opportunity to go out and enjoy your community.
You do. I mean, it is a fabulous time of year to be out there. There's lots of events going on, not just in the local community of the particular MHK's constituency, but across the island. And it's great to be able to engage with people. I mean, obviously, the front-facing side of politics that people see is the House of Keys and Tynwald sittings coming to an end, but everything else carries on. So, for instance, I've still got meetings in the diary for, the run up to Christmas Eve. It all carries on, but that's not really public facing, so people seem to think we all go off on a break until the end of January when Tynwald resumes. It's very much not. Everything else carries on. The business of government carries on, the parliamentary committees carry on, the dealing with constituency issues carries on, but it is a fabulous time of year to be able to see communities coming together and being able to celebrate Christmas together.
And are you a tenor or a bass?
I'm an absolutely rubbish singer. I'd say tone deaf, actually. I'd go for the third.
Oh, dear. Oh, well. So if you are out at a carol service and you see David Ashford maybe move in a different direction. But it's a great time of year when things are going well. But, of course, there are also, at this time of year, difficult circumstances. There'll be people who've lost close members of family. There'll be there are various stresses and strains that kind of bubble up over the Christmas break as well. And as an MHK, often because there's limited services available over the Christmas time, that you end up being called on to try and help and try and find solutions for people.
You do, and it's important that people have support over the period. So, I mean, one of the things, certainly with one of my hats on as chair of the Housing Communities Board, that we've been looking to do, that's why the homelessness pathway has been so essential, because homelessness doesn't stop because it's Christmas. It's very easy to forget that there are people in some dire circumstances out there, and that's why it's important that those support services do carry on. I know with my former hat on as well, when I was DHSC Minister, back now in the department as a member, that all those support services continue to operate over the Christmas period. The crisis response team, mental health service, and I think it's a good opportunity as well at Christmas to remember the hard work and dedication of all our frontline service staff, and a chance to say thank you to them for everything they do 365 days a year.
And of course there are lots of voluntary organisations, charities and things that do an awful lot of good work as well over the Christmas time.
We are exceptionally lucky on the island to have the third sector that we do. If you actually look around at all the different things that people are involved in and all the different services that is provided to people just by charitable organisations, some of them very small, 1 or 2 people, it's absolutely remarkable what's out there. I'll never forget about 12 years ago when I was Mayor of Douglas, and I thought, you think a lot of the charities that are out there, a lot of the organisations. I met organisations during my year as Mayor 12 years ago that I'd never heard of in my life, but were doing absolutely essential things to support people or make people's lives better. And it really is remarkable that for such a small island, we have such a diverse range of both charities and individuals going second to none to actually provide services to people.
And I suppose what everyone wants for Christmas is a white Christmas. So can the Isle of Man government guarantee a beautiful white snowy Christmas day?
I think if the government probably guaranteed rain on Christmas, it'd probably be bright sunshine. So I'm not going to go down that route, Phil, at all. Not everyone wants a white Christmas. I'm a bit of a humbug in that regard. I'm quite happy if the white stuff stays away. But no, so I'm afraid I can't guarantee a white Christmas.
Well, one of the reasons it's interesting to talk about Christmas and how that impacts on you as an MHK. But one of the reasons I asked you on the show is because you are back as a member of the Council of Ministers, and you are, on this occasion, in the Cabinet Office. It's not the Minister for Policy and Reform, but it is the Minister in the Cabinet Office that does some of the things that the Minister of Policy and Reform did, I guess. But what else does a Cabinet Office Minister do?
So the Cabinet Office is the strategic core of government, is probably the best way for me to describe it. It holds the central policy unit. It has all the shared services across government, so such as Office of Human Resources, Government Technology Services, all sit within the Cabinet Office. We have the Crown External Relations Division as well, that deals obviously with relations with the Crown and further afield too, and the Ireland's effective foreign affairs portfolio. So it is a wide range of things. The Housing Communities Board is administered by the Cabinet Office as well, of which I'm chair. So it's a wide breadth of things, and the purpose of Cabinet Office is to be that strategic centre and try and ensure that there's joined up thinking across government and joined up policy making.
And there are lots of issues that are occurring in the centre. It appears, maybe I'm misreading this, that more things are ending up in the centre than perhaps was the case when the Cabinet Office initially was established. Is there a sort of a grab to centralise everything, or is this just my imagination?
Well, I don't think there's any grab to centralise, and that actually is a very interesting phrase, because my views are very much on public record that I don't believe our model of government with the departments the way they are now is right. I've given up on calling it single legal entity because that has different connotations now, and I've taken to calling it one government. There are functions that spread across departments, and I think, it's important that we start looking at things rather than actually in the silos of departments as being across government, and that's what Cabinet Office does. So it's not about grabbing power from one area or the other. Isle of Man government should be one entity. It should be all pulling in the same direction, not say with the individual departments saying this is mine or that is mine. And so it is things like, for instance, HR and Government Technology Services. It makes sense to deliver them in the centre. Would you really want every department of government having their own HR function, having their own GTS function? In fact, going back many years ago, each department did effectively have their own HR function.
Many of them lament the fact that they've lost that.
They do, but I wouldn't say the taxpayer laments the cost that those services were sometimes provided at. And this is the thing. I think it's important that government speaks with one voice and operates as one organisation. So when things come into the centre, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It's about how it actually works. And the point with Cabinet Office is Cabinet Office works in conjunction with the departments. It's not about dictating to departments or dictating to the whole of government. It's about those departments having help and support to deliver on their priorities.
Why then do you think that if you go out to departments that they say, actually, we aren't getting the support perhaps that we need, and that perhaps they look rather cynically at some of the centralisation and say, well, what's ended up happening was this was a cost-saving exercise. Everything was brought into the centre. Several jobs were let go, and as a result, we all have a poorer service. Well,
I think the important thing from my point of view as Cabinet Office Minister is that we look at the shared services. We did this in my very first interview, which was with you when I took on the role, which is, I think it's absolute priority over the next 18 months to look at those shared services, how they're delivering, what they're delivering. But I think as well, sometimes we've got to remember that, again, a government as a whole entity, you can have areas of government that may have 3 or 4 priorities, and those priorities are absolutely crucial for that area of government. But in the bigger scheme of government, they're not the top 4 priorities of the government as a whole. And I think it's about people better understanding what can and can't be delivered, and timescales as well. But one of the things we need to do as a government is digitise faster. There's a lot of things and a lot of services that are duplicated across departments. the Tell Us Once proposal that was talked about when I was a member for Cabinet Office in 2016, it's still not fully there. And we need to get it there, as I was saying in the House of Keys only a couple of weeks ago, because that unlocks all sorts of benefits. Not just for government, because it's easy to talk about the benefits of government, but ultimately government is supposed to be there for the benefit of the citizen.
And is this possible? Because you say you were talking about it in 2016. Now, I imagine, certainly I know most of the time during which I was a minister, we were talking about similar sorts of things, about the clunkiness of the way in which we engaged, or the public engaged with government through IT systems. And I'm sure when computers were first a thing, the politicians back in the day would have been saying, yes, this will simplify things and it'll all be really easy and straightforward. And yet every time we log on to the system, we have to enter in all the different details which the system already knows about us, but we have to enter them all in again.
There are various solutions, technological solutions that can be done to make sure you don't do that. So that and the important thing is now advancing that. I think a lot of the times, and you'll probably remember this from when you were minister, it can be very easy to get distracted away from the big sort of forward-looking projects, but you've got to deal with the day-to-day. And it becomes day-to-day firefighting, dealing with the problem that's there in front of you, and you lose sight of the actual strategic decisions that need to be taken to make things simpler in the future. And I think what we've got to do as a government is we've got to be very firm and very focused on saying, no, they still need to be resourced, because although it's going to cost in the first 3 or 4 years, ultimately the long-term benefit both saves money and makes it easier for government to communicate with citizens and vice versa. Because like you say, Phil, how many times do people actually have to input the same thing into government systems when really they should be able to just put their name in and government will have the rest of the systems following? Same with change of address. You shouldn't have to change your address in multiple different places. You should be able to tell government once and that feeds through the systems. And there are technological secure solutions out there that actually will do that, and we need to now be pushing it forward.
There's one example which I'm going to use, but I'm not going to name and shame because I think it would be unfair, but a system, a service of government that I use online has recently changed, and it's gone from a system which was relatively straightforward to use to one that now requires an extra 2 or 3 clicks to find the information that I used to find with perhaps one click of my little mouse. Do you think sometimes government is or can get absorbed with itself, and it's internally focused? It's focusing on how do we make the system work better for us as civil servants or politicians or whatever, and forget that actually there is a user outside. Maybe there needs to be some kind of IT user group that can give feedback on some of the solutions that are presented.
I mean, I don't necessarily agree with the second half about how government feels it would be better for it, but I agree with the first half. I think, this idea that you lose sight of the user. Because the problem with any system and the danger is if you're involved in designing it and you're passionate about it, you understand it, you understand how it's working. You don't necessarily think of it from the point of view of someone who's coming to it completely and utterly fresh, who's never seen that before. How easy is it for them? When I was in the private sector, there was what was termed the 3-click principle, which means you shouldn't really have to do more than 3 clicks to get to any particular thing that you're after. Now, even in the private sector, some elements of the private sector are very good at it. Others, you go onto websites where even after 20 clicks, you're still not where you want to be. And we all know about the press 1, 2, 3, press 24 to get 2 options thing. So I think government's exactly the same. Government needs to actually think from the user's point of view and say, right, well, if I am someone coming to this completely and utterly fresh, and I want to today, change my address on this system, how long does it take me if I don't know where to navigate to, if I'm just coming from it completely new? And that's what we should be doing with every single system that's designed, that's forward-facing.
So there'll be an election in just over 18 months' time. If you continue in your role as Cabinet Office Minister, you can be judged on how easy it is to use the government website. Is that fair?
I think the government website is another point, in fact, that needs a complete overhaul. And there are plans to change gov.im, because, to be honest, if you go on it, there's so many broken links. There's so many things that don't point in the right direction, and it's not easy to find things. I know people who've resorted to using Google to search the Isle of Man government website, so that clearly shows there's an issue. There's various different solutions there for microsites, and that is already in chain. I think when it comes to politics, I'll be judged on an awful lot of things, Phil, not just on how quickly people can click through a website, but if I did decide to stand again, that would be a matter for the people of Douglas North to decide.
So the Cabinet Office has a fairly wide remit of things. I'm guessing, well, I don't know, you tell me, can you bring some of your pet projects? So one of your pet projects, of course, as a backbencher, has been looking into local government and how local government works and how it interacts with central government. Is that something that you're going to be in a position to look at?
Well, one of the things I always never try to do is I never try to confuse my ministerial role with my parliamentary role. My personal views on local government reform are well known and well documented for nearly 20 years now, where I've been very, very clear that I personally believe we have too many local authorities, that we should have 5 local authorities around the island. That's my personal view. There's a lot of people who disagree with it. I never ever use my ministerial role. I didn't in health either to try and push my own personal agendas. I have my views when things come forward, but I wouldn't try and impose that within a department by virtue of me having a ministerial title. I will continue to campaign for local government reform, and I will continue to push for the model I believe is right for the island. But like I say, other people have different opinions there, and I wouldn't try to use my position as Minister for the Cabinet Office to try and force my views onto people.
So you've partly answered the question. I suppose the part that you haven't answered is this on the agenda as part of the role of the Cabinet Office?
From a government point of view, it is not on the agenda. There is no plans that I'm aware of at a government level to look at local government reform. Let's make that absolutely clear before all the hairs start running. From my personal point of view, do I believe it should be a priority somewhere down the line? I certainly do, because I think, it's been talked about, and I think the earliest reference I found in Hansard was about 1901, I think, not long after they'd had all the reorganisation of the town and villages in the 1880s, 1890s. So I think it's been talked about enough, and I hope that the next administration will pick it up, because I doubt now there's time really for it to be picked up in this administration. But my views are well on record. Everyone knows where I stand. Whether they agree with me or not is another matter. But I personally believe we do need local government reform.
Formerly, the Cabinet Office Minister was responsible for the Public Services Commission. You seem to have dodged that particular chairmanship. Is there any particular thinking behind
Well,
that?
I wouldn't say dodged. It has changed between people in different roles over the years. But also, of course, people have got to remember I've retained chair of the Housing Communities Board as well. So I've already got that, and I'm also remaining as a member within Department of Health and Social Care. My joke was, before I became Cabinet Office Minister, if you included my parliamentary committees, I had 7 jobs. That's now come down to 3 jobs, but they're 3 big jobs: Minister for the Cabinet Office, member within DHSC, and chair of the Housing Communities Board. And I think me taking on the chair of the Public Services Commission, and also the public sector pension role that normally goes with that as well, I think will probably, even for me, have been probably a step too far.
And actually, you mentioned public sector pensions. That seems to have gone quiet. I mean, for a while it was seen as that. Oh, this was going to drag government down into a dark hole of economic difficulty. But is it resolved now, the whole issue with public sector pensions?
Well, I don't think pensions ever is what you term resolved. I think even if you look at private sector schemes and everything else, there's always needs to be ongoing examination of the schemes. But what I would say is it's settled in the sense that we had the cost sharing envelope obviously introduced. We had some major reforms over the last 10 years that have stabilised the schemes more, and there's been different options with round schemes as well and schemes introduced. So I think what I'd say is, rather than it's completely done, everything else, it's more settled than it's been for a long time. But when it comes to pensions as well, I think one of the important things is people always look at the wrong thing, because people look at the figure of the liability, and that always makes a great headline for any news organisation, what the figure of the liability is. But what matters actually is how that liability becomes due. So for instance, if I told you there were two pension schemes, both had a liability of £1 billion, and I said to you which is worse off, which scheme's in trouble, well, you'd say they're both the same. But if I said scheme A has a liability of £1 billion and that will be paid out over the next 50 years, scheme B has a liability of £1 billion and that will be paid out over the next 80 years, well, your answer will be scheme A is the one that's the more in trouble, because their liability becomes due. And a liability has all sorts of calculations and factors, so liabilities go up and down annually. So it's very important when we talk about pensions that we don't just focus on the overall liability
and
figure.
Of course, the other thing with pensions is changes to the general rate of inflation matter a big amount in this. So when you have a relatively stable position in terms of inflation, with relatively low inflation and relatively low, therefore, interest gained on investments, your pension pot becomes less attractive. But when you have higher rates of growth, then the problem becomes less significant.
Well, there's other factors as well alongside the actual, what I would term the real economic factors. There is also, of course, the what I'd call predictive economic factors. So a life expectancy gets factored in as well around a liability of a fund. A thing called the discount rate, which if anyone wants to go and Google what that is, they'll find a very interesting thing to read about how the liabilities are calculated. So there's all sorts of different things that factor into a pension liability, and that's why I say, I think the important thing whenever we talk not just about public sector pensions but even private pensions out there and private schemes, what matters isn't that liability figure so much, it's how that liability is spread and the factors that are actually put in place to calculate that.
We've got out of the difficulties now that we've faced, the kind of the aftermath of the COVID years and the various economic problems that occurred, both in terms of shutdowns, lockdowns, which reduced economic output, but also the significant amounts of money that were spent by government over that time. We've kind of worked through that now, and we are now in a position where we have to look at, or government has to look at, being much more stringent in terms of its financial expenditure. It's going to be a difficult year or two in the run-up to the election, isn't it?
It's going to be a very difficult one, but then I have said for a long, long time, we need to be honest with the public and treat the public like adults and explain the situation. It is absolutely crucial that we ensure that public finances are adequately managed, and that the services that we need to deliver are affordable. We would all like, gold-plated services, both in health, education, home affairs, DOI, the roads. But the fact is that comes at a cost, and we've got to have that honest debate about how services are paid for and how government generates money and how that money is spent. And I think that, that is a crucial conversation we have to have. And I think one of the things that can be said about this administration, whether people agree with this administration or not, is it hasn't ducked the big challenges. It has looked head on to try and tackle some of the big problems that have been building up in some cases for 20 years now.
Well, as this is the show before Christmas, and all through the house, the MHKs are still stirring. What does Christmas dinner look like in the Ashford household?
Well, I cook Christmas dinner for my extended family, so I think it's off the top of my head, probably about 10 or 12 this year I'll be cooking for. So for me, it's a race around the kitchen. But for me, you know, kids, they're the centre of Christmas, really. That's what Christmas is all about. It's about family, and it's about kids and being thankful for what you have in life.
And any tips on roast potatoes or roast parsnips or whatever?
Don't burn them.
Well, yes, I suppose that's... yes, that's a reasonable tip. Are you a parboil and then sort of...
Oh, I am. I parboil, then roasted in goose fat with rosemary and thyme.
Oh well, there we are. So there's your Christmas dinner hint from David Ashford. And if you were able to give Isle of Man government a Christmas present this year, what would it be?
Well, I think that's a very, very good question. I think the Christmas present, from my point of view, would be to actually try and get more things digitised and get things easier for the general public to engage with government.
As we approach the new year, do you have any New Year predictions?
Well, my crystal ball gets foggier by the day. In fact, the last thing I don't use Twitter much, but I remember wishing everyone a happy 2020, and look how that worked out. So I try to steer away from predictions. But what I would say is I would hope that in the next year we can actually start moving things forward in terms of delivering services that people can see, touch and feel. So things like starting the building of affordable housing, the digitisation I'm talking about, feeding through to the way people interact with government, and actually getting things changed for people on the ground. That's what I would hope that 2025 holds.
That was Cabinet Office Minister and MHK for Douglas North, David Ashford there. So what do you think? Will the new minister be able to deliver the political presents that have been promised for so long by Tynwald and government? Or will it be a long, cold year ahead? Perhaps a bit of both. And what do you reckon to the minister's Christmas dinner parsnip tip? Thanks for listening to Agenda throughout the year, and have a good Christmas and a prosperous new year. I'm Phil Gaughan. Nola Gennel Eru as Blaine Fi Vai.